And welcome into the Harrell and Harrell Performance Studio. I'm Rich Jones. I'm the host of Jacksonville's Morning News on News 104.5 FM and AM 690. As we continue our dialogue with community leaders and stakeholders in working to try to stop the violence in Northeast Florida. And the conversation really is one that has not gone away for those of us who have lived in Jacksonville for many years, myself more than a decade, 12 years now. And I remember the Jacksonville journey, and I remember the story of Drashana Davis, which was a seminal moment in time for Northeast Florida and for a targeted effort to trying to solve the criminal element within the Jacksonville community. And we've seen iterations where we see flashes and then things start to back off a little bit more. And we bring in these community leaders in these moments to look under the hood and try to get a better idea of what's happening. What are the possible solutions? What do we need to do more of? What are the areas where we're maybe spinning our wheels and wasting our time? Can we get a hold of this? Last week, we spoke with community leaders on the ground level from the faith community and mental health and from law enforcement. And today, we wanted to bring in Mayor Lenny Curry and Sheriff Mike Williams to talk deeper about what are the targeted programs that they want to make sure that they implement within this community over the coming years. So I'm joined now by Mayor Lenny Curry and also by Sheriff Mike Williams. And Sheriff, I want to start with you because when you announced the arrest of a 16-year-old for the murder of a 19-year-old after the Reigns football game, you said something that really stood out. You said it's unbelievable to be at the point where a 16-year-old can think it's okay to murder someone in cold blood at a football game. You looked and sounded angry. Are you?
You know, there's a level of frustration that comes with dealing with these issues, and when you see them multiple times, I'll take you back to the landing. In the shooting we had at the landing, not Sunday, but about a year and a half ago.
Art walk time.
You had a very similar situation when you had a young teenage male pulling out a gun in broad daylight that time on the front steps of the landing to solve a dispute. And so the question that we raised then is the same one we raise now. How did they get there? How did we as a community get there? And how did that young person get there? And it's not an easy answer. I mean, it's multifaceted and can be complicated. But as a community, we've got to answer that question and start working on the solutions to that.
What solution did you come up with when you heard the 16-year-old? Do you already have one that you can target and say it's this one thing? Is it parental? Is it drugs? Is it gangs? What is it?
So yes, I mean, and again, that's why it's not an easy answer to that. There are things that you absolutely have to do. So you have to be able to get involved in the lives of young people, which the city's doing through KHA and a variety of programs and supporting those nonprofits. That avenue's got to be there, no doubt about it. We'd love to see parents heavily engaged. We would. There's a variety of things on the prevention end of the equation that needs to happen. And then as a community, we've got to be focused on some crime prevention issues. We've gotten the question a lot in the last couple weeks. Where'd all the guns come from? Well, we do every night the 9 o'clock routine, and it's to keep people from leaving guns in unlocked cars, and we're losing 500 guns a year out of unlocked cars. Well, that's not responsible gun ownership. So, there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of check some boxes and to get the right pieces of the puzzle together, if you will, to get us on the right track. But it's not an easy fix. It doesn't happen overnight, but we've got to stay focused on the work, stay consistent in that.
Mayor Curry, you ran on a platform of keeping this community safe. It's been a target of budget priorities for you from the word go, clearly. Are you dissatisfied with the results that we've seen so far? Where are we missing the mark, perhaps, as a community?
I'm going to be dissatisfied as long as there's one violent crime, and I know Mike feels the same way. When Mike and I got into office, here's what had happened. Here's the scenario that we were dealing with. We had a law enforcement community under John Rutherford and others that were screaming for resources. Literally, we've had cuts. We don't have enough boots on the ground. We have outdated equipment, and that was across the board in both police, fire, and other areas. So you got to get the building blocks. You got to get that stuff right. Heavy investment in partnership here. 180 police officers funded. Bring back community service officers. The Jacksonville Journey, which was the prevention and intervention piece, had been close to defunded. When I got in, we brought back funding there. We've since consolidated that with an organization that's now called the Kids Hope Alliance. So, yes, 3 budgets investing in that stuff, but we've got to be vigilant. We've got to continue working towards strategies. And the question you asked, what is it? Is it gangs? Is it poverty? Is it the neighborhood? And number of factors. What we're working towards with others is like any problem you have to solve, right? If you look at all those factors, can you pick the top one or two? And where you find that they are predominant, get to those young people. The goal of the Kids Hope Alliance, it serves many children with many needs, and that's what it's going to do. But one of the things I want to see come out of this, and they know this is part of my mission, how do you identify young people that are most likely to end up committing a crime, using a gun, or having a gun used against them? Maybe it's kids that are likely in the juvenile justice system or have been in the juvenile justice system, and then a number of one or two factors. And those are the young people we need to be embracing and getting in programs.
What answers do you already have?
We're doing that now. So again, 3 years ago, the funding it was cut pretty steep. And by the way, if you keep doing the same thing over again, getting the same results, you got to try something new. So we had the Jacksonville Children's Commission and the Jacksonville Journey, both which had done good work over the years. But I said, we need reform here. We need a new way of thinking. That organization is now not even a year old. They've got an incredibly aggressive, smart CEO leading the organization that's reaching out to people across the community to embrace them. And we just have to be vigilant, and we have to stay on it.
What results are you specifically looking for over the coming year to see the kind of progress that you expected when you laid out those expectations?
We don't want to see any more violent crimes. I mean, you have to.
Is that a reality, though?
Well,
in a city this size?
The goal. So what are you going to say? 10's okay? 20's okay? Yeah. No, you can't say that. So you gotta keep fighting and strategizing as long as one is happening, 50 are happening, and I know I'm not speaking for Mike, but we spent enough time talking about this stuff, strategizing on this stuff, and our state attorneys, we're all aligned on this.
You are in discussions with the state attorney on a more in-depth basis in coming weeks. That's been something that you all have said in the days after the Rains shooting, after the high school football game, after Haiti Rivas Villanueva's death, and ultimately after the Landing mass shooting event, which was precipitated by a different thing, but you all have been meeting. What have those conversations really sounded like that are maybe different than what you've had before? Have you uncovered new ideas or strategies that you've already heard in these last few weeks in these conversations?
So, we're always looking for new things. I mean, we have spent the last couple of years traveling to different cities around the country, look specifically about violence reduction strategies. And so there are things that we've brought here and implemented, things that we have not as of yet that we want to take a look at. Some things may work for Jacksonville and may not. So we're going to try to balance that and put some of those things in play. The key here is that you've got a state attorney and a mayor's office and city hall and a council and a sheriff that all sit down and talk together. So, nobody's worried about the credit. Nobody's worried about, the silo, hey, this is my idea. And you don't always have that. In some of the cities that we've been to and talk to people, you get a couple of those players at the table, you're doing good. And so one positive out of this I can say for the community is that you've got all the leadership, rowing the boat in the same direction, which again doesn't always happen. And so I would look for, again, in any of the players at that table to bring forth some creative ideas and everybody really evaluate that on that idea's merit, not where it came from. And we've done that, in these last couple of years, and we're going to continue to do that.
How do you feel the level of engagement then is from the leadership being on the same page to these communities? We heard last week from our panel about the 32208 and 09 zip codes specifically and some of the access to resources and parks and other things like that. Are there still areas of disconnect within the urban core communities where we see these waves of violence and we see the numbers each year? How satisfied are you with the relationships that you've built at this point, and where are the building blocks that you can grow from?
So, the last couple of years, as you've seen, we have spent a lot of time and effort in that regard to try to build relationships in the community. One of the reasons why is because we believe we're not going to be successful as a law enforcement agency and as a city unless you've got good cooperation and good engagement from the community. So you've got to be down in those neighborhoods, building trust, making them want to call the police when there's an issue. And we get that. We get a high level of cooperation across the board from all communities in Jacksonville. There's a certain segment of the population that we don't get a lot of cooperation from. And it can always be better, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that this is an issue where you never really arrive that, hey, our relationship with the community is perfect, it's right where it needs to be. You got to always work on that because there's always challenges to it at the end of the day. So, we've taken a couple steps forward sometimes. Other times we've had a challenge, taking a step back. But it's important to us to recognize when we have those challenges that we work to acknowledge it, work to overcome it, be very transparent, hold our people accountable. But we have to, as a foundation, have a solid relationship, really a proactive partnership with the community to get ahead of this. And
speaking of engaging the community, so the Kids Hope Alliance works with like communities in schools, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Police Athletic League, all these organizations, by the way, that have people that engaged in the community, the neighborhoods, and understand it. However, there are really small organizations, maybe a small church in a neighborhood, in a zip code that's challenged, that's already doing some of this work but doesn't have access to the resources just because they're so small. So the recent effort was Councilman Reggie Gaffney came to me a couple of weeks ago, and he said, hey, I want to make a move and ask the council to appropriate a few $100,000. Will you support it? I said, not only will I support it, I'm going to see what kind of reserves we have in the executive branch, and we identified some monies there. And so those monies will be, through a process, will go to, in these neighborhoods, right to people that are like living it day to day, that are already doing some of the good work. And, and the expectation would be, just pick one kid that gets touched through that, and they're not a part of this crime we're seeing. We'll never know that. But that's the kind of work we have to do.
We heard that as part of the panel last week was the smaller grassroots type organizations. Charles Griggs from 100 Black Men of Jacksonville in Northeast Florida talking about access to resources. And sometimes it's these smaller community type groups that really do need that infusion and access to the cash. Is $350,000 enough? Does that sustain for the coming years?
Look, we've already got over $40 million going in through the Kids Hope Alliance, through kids programs. So dollars are going in. More dollars are going in than when I came into office. But this is a start to engage those organizations, and the plan is get some success here, get the right folks on board and engaged, and figure out how to make it sustainable.
Is there a role for private business to potentially get involved? How are you leveraging some of the personal relationships you have? Someone even around the table was saying, boy, wouldn't it be great if, there were a lot of those conversations, I'm sure there probably are behind closed doors as well, wouldn't it be great if millions of dollars from company A were able to be infused for that? How hard are you really pressing the scales with some of the business connections you have to maybe say, hey, we all have skin in this game to make this a safer community that's more vibrant and more lucrative for businesses to want to come here? We weren't on that short list for Amazon. Why not? Could that be one of the reasons? How hard are you pressing these businesses?
We are engaging the private sector on these dollars we're talking about for these grassroots organizations. I can tell you from Mike and from our perspective, there is a conversation happening now about engaging them, but engaging them in the right way. A strategy that asks them to put their dollars in that'll get results. One of the things we just started this year, we've had the Mayor's Summer Jobs Program that for years has been government jobs, only government jobs. Months ago, I started asking CEOs of companies if they would hire some of these young folks for summer jobs, and this was the first summer we did that. I'm going to ask them to expand that. Another conversation I'm going to have with them, because literally in a neighborhood last week, I had a lady ask me in the audience, she said, can your summer's job program be year-round? Can there be part-time jobs for these young people when they're not in school? And I said, good question. I'm going to take that idea to those business leaders as well.
Are you hearing those kinds of ideas, Sheriff, that you want to be able to act on? And what have been some of the recent ideas, as I think the community interest is a little bit more on this issue of violent crime in Northeast Florida and Jacksonville specifically?
We have. I mean, we are, again, we have an active day-to-day role in trying to engage the community, and the business community is part of that. So we have those conversations all the time. And typically in years past, what we've gotten is, Sheriff, what can I buy you? What do you need for your men? And we are well taken care of by the city at the end of the day. So other communities don't have that. Other communities, officers buy equipment on their own, that type of thing, and we haven't had that challenge around here. So, we're looking at something a little more creative in the vein of how can we ramp up our engagement with the community, how can we touch more people and really increase the interaction, not just us pushing information, but how can we have a two-way conversation, and how do we make it easy? And so there's a lot of there's technology involved in that. There's campaign dollars, so to speak, involved in that. So we're having those conversations today and moving forward. So we'll have something coming up here soon that I think I'd like to see the entire city really get behind.
And part of what we're trying to study, I kind of touched on this before, is so you look at all the factors, but what are the top how can you narrow down the top, whether it's 2 or 3 factors that will most likely result in a young person either being a perpetrator or a victim? Because if we look at all the factors that contribute, if we say in order to deal with violent crime, we are going to have to overnight solve poverty, solve gangs, solve education, if that is the goal right now, you're not going to see results in the short term or even in the next couple of years. However, anybody that's been engaged in problem solving knows, and this is what we're talking about now, what are the top 2 or 3 things that correlate in a young person's life, and those are the individuals we need to work with, get to, and focus on.
I would imagine that government intervention in someone's home is probably one of the trickier things to ever navigate. I mean, how do you move into someone's head and heart and know that they are being brought up in a wholesome manner? How far can we go? How far can the community and leadership go to looking in and being a partner with parents and with families to ensure that these kids are not, we heard Ken Jefferson say last week on this panel, you can get a gun as easy as you can get a sandwich in many neighborhoods. How do we ensure that we've instilled something in that kid that has them turning to the bag of Skittles or a sandwich as opposed to a gun?
So, you know, one of the things that we talk about a lot is getting involved in the lives of young people early. We can't impact what happens inside the home. You know, hopefully the faith community can at some point, and there's a lot of other factors that weigh into that. But from a government standpoint, there's not a lot you can do but once that door closes at 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the evening inside that house, you know, to impact the way kids are raised. I mean, you can provide, again, services and information, but, you know, it's a tricky situation to try to impact that. What you can do is try to, through, you know, a variety of methods, and we talk a lot about after-school programs and summer programs where you keep kids busy and you're giving them these different ideas that maybe they don't hear at home, or you're giving them a different conflict resolution method instead of, you know, going to the corner and trying to find a gun. So those are the kind of things that the community can do, the city can do, that we can engage in. And of course, we do it through POW, as the sheriff mentioned, or as the mayor mentioned. But you've got, you know, a lot of great nonprofits, large and small, in the community doing that. It's just about giving those kids the nuggets of information they need, and hopefully planting some seeds in them that'll help them make good decisions when the time comes.
The power of mentoring, the power of getting involved in a young person's life that needs it, that demonstrates to them a level of love, a level of respect, and a level of discipline. If they've got a bad home life, but you're the mentor, you can check in on them. If they make a bad decision, you can help them correct the decision before they go too far. I've lived it. I've had mentees in my life, and you can literally save them and their future. I'll give you an example, too. Again, some of the conversations are happening and we're mentoring. So months ago, Calais Campbell, his team reached out. We had a meeting in my office months ago to talk about a variety of things that had nothing to do with football. It had to do with him wanting to make an impact in this community. And so we made a number of connections. I saw yesterday in the news, and I saw a couple of weeks ago, the work he's doing through and with the Kids Hope Alliance that is really getting to talking to young people. That's powerful stuff.
He was at Rains High School talking to kids. There was some football talk, but there was also some talk about making the right decisions. Share from a law enforcement perspective, boots on the ground, having the law enforcement officers in the communities is one thing. Does that carry more weight?
So listen, you have to be able to have the right amount of resources in there to provide service to the community. And we have 1 million people in Jacksonville. You know, with the mayor's obviously support and help, we're up to about 1,785 police officers in Jacksonville. We've got work to do over the years to get, you know, where we need to be. But we have hired about 600 new policemen since I've been sheriff, you know, filling retirement positions, adding the new positions that the mayor's given us. So that's part of the equation, and we're working on that. So is new technology from a law enforcement perspective. So you've got to leverage new technologies. That's a force multiplier for you. Then that'll help. At the end of the day, the community service officers have been a tremendous, you know, a benefit for us, allowing those police officers with gun and badges to be down in those neighborhoods doing police work and not handling a crash or picking up evidence or doing other administrative duties. So that's been a great, you know, a great program for us. But, you know, we evaluate that every single day. You know, are we in the right place at the right time, doing the right things? That's something that is a constant theme inside the organization, and we're going to keep doing that. You know, we're going to keep driving that point home to our baseline commanders that, hey, here's how we do business. So rather than create new initiatives with fancy names that get stuck in a silo, we want the agency working that way, and so that's what we've been working on for the last couple of years.
Well, the fancy name for our conversation is Stop the Violence, but clearly, as we're hearing from the mayor and sheriff, there are a number of different areas to explore and areas of focus that the community can rally around, and in the next half hour, we'll be digging deeper into our issues related to mental health, access to guns, faith-based initiatives, and community-based initiatives that we know are tangibly showing some positive results here on News 104.5 FM and AM 690. And as we continue our conversation, guys, speaking with Mayor and Sheriff, what are the programs that you're really proud of that have started to see some actual benefits and results? I'd start with the Sheriff on that. Something new, something that really has you like bugging this guy for more money coming from the city level because it's actually working in these neighborhoods.
Yeah, there's some good, when a ShotSpotter is one from a technology standpoint that comes to mind. So, we looked at ShotSpotter 10 or 12 years ago, and it just wasn't. We didn't feel like it was there, and the return on investment was not quite.
What does it do again, just for someone who doesn't know?
ShotSpotter is a gunfire detection system, and so people say, "Well, what does that do?" It tells you where the gunshots are. Well, it does a whole lot more than that. It's a great awareness tool for the officers who are responding. This piece of technology is so powerful that a gun is fired in the area that we have ShotSpotter up and running, and within 90 seconds, that it's captured by the sensors. It goes to California, is reviewed in what's called an incident review center, and then that officer on his smartphone or his laptop gets within 90 seconds plus or minus 3 meters of where that gun has been fired, the caliber of the gun that's been fired, how many guns at the scene have been fired. I mean, that's an incredibly powerful tool for the officers responding. And then obviously investigatively after the fact, we're able to get there that much quicker, provide aid that much quicker, apprehend suspects that much quicker, recover evidence that much quicker. I mean, it's incredible, the power of that tool. So that's one of the things that we really have. It's been up and running for about a year. ShotSpotter just came back in, and we kind of did a review of, are we getting bang for the buck? Is this working for us? And we're very happy with where we are with that. So, but that's not a tool that you would use citywide. I think at the end of the day, we've got to continue on the prevention path. We've got to work in that area, and we've got to work on that segment of young men in this community that I've heard too many times people say, those are the lost cause. Well, listen, those are the guys pulling the trigger today. So there's got to be some kind of touch there. Sometimes it's enforcement. Absolutely, it's appropriate. It's got to be something beyond that too. And so we're working in that area as well to again, try to disrupt that mindset, disrupt that thought process, and try to guide some better decision making in that area.
Are they a lost cause?
No, all life is valuable, and in any life that we can save and turn around, we need to be in the trenches fighting for them. And I keep going back to, it sounds simple, mentoring. I mean, we're going to invest money, we're going to have programs. But in the end, those programs have to have consistency in this young person's life. That young person needs to know it's real, that you really care about them. And there needs to be some accountability, discipline, and belief. I've said it before. I've lived it. I have been engaged with young people that have been exposed to terrible things and that start to head the right direction, and then they get a little blip. But you know what? I have found that if you're a consistency in their life, you can help get them back on track.
Why is it?
I want to follow up on that, too. And it's, our issue, the driver is young men in this community. And I'm a firm believer, listen, single mothers, and God bless them for all that they do, and many of them do a tremendous job. But you need to have a male in front of some of these young men, and they need to see that. They need to see what it is they can be, not just, I'm hopeless and I'm stuck in this situation, I'll never get out. You need someone, a mentor, in their ear telling them, hey, you can do this. I did this. I came from your neighborhood, and here I am today, that type of thing. I mean, that's incredibly important. It means a lot more to have that happen than for them to hear the sheriff tell them not to do this or the mayor tell them not to do that. It's not coming from the same place. I mean, you need someone in front of them that's been there, obviously, that they can relate to. That gives them something that, again, the role model, the mentor to help them along the way.
All right, so you have a listener out here who hears the appeal. What are the programs? What's the first step? How do I get involved? How do I spend? I may only have 6 to 8 hours in a month to do. Does it help? Is that enough? And who do I make contact with? What are the organizations that are doing good in this space?
Call the Kids Hope Alliance, and they can get you in touch with a number of organizations. Some they work with, some that they just partner with. And if it's 6 hours a week, if it's 2 hours a week. The first time that I remember getting involved I was in my 20s, and I didn't know how impactful it would be. It was a Bigs in Schools. I think I spent, I don't know, maybe an hour a week in a school, if I remember correctly. Again, this is 20 years ago, but it's touching the life of a child.
And you don't maybe see the benefit right away, but you can have the faith in knowing that maybe you're making a positive impact somehow, some way.
So you have to look at it as an investment. I mean, you can't let the events of a weekend derail that type of commitment to, staying focused on that. We use the example of, or the analogy of a little boy or a little girl who is, 7 years old today. Where are they when they're 17? That's the return on investment. Are they graduating from high school? Are they going off to college? Are they joining the military? Or are they already a gang member? Already in prison or already dead? I mean, so those are the things that we need to look at and as a community stay focused on that. And that's been a challenge for us for many years.
And it can be, it can be a challenge if you've never been exposed to some of the really tough things that happen, frankly, in neighborhoods and in some families. Some will ask the question, if all you have known is a life of discipline and access to education, maybe the first time if you try to mentor a 10-year-old that maybe pushes you a bit in a very disrespectful way, the natural reaction, I've heard it, and I understand it, may be, well, they just need to make good decisions. Well, imagine that 10-year-old was 8 years old and they saw somebody get shot or they saw a robbery happen, and that was a normal part of their exposure. That young person needs love, they need acceptance. Now, they do need discipline and attention and accountability, but also an understanding of where they came from.
Is there a mental health and a funding for mental health component to this? And a lot of that is above local. That leads into state issues and those kinds of things. But is there a role to play there? Because I'm imagining that conversation, and it's almost like therapist to client, perhaps, in some ways, based on the lack of experience that someone in a mentor capacity may not necessarily have.
Sure. The Kids Hope Alliance, the legislation when we created the organization has a mental health component to it, and it's actually laid out in the legislation. And I have to credit those in the community that live this every day with young people that pushed me hard to make sure that was a part of the legislation. So KHA has that. The latest budget that I've submitted to City Council, they're going through right now with the Kids Hope Alliance as a component that partners with Duval County Public Schools and others to have counselors in the schools. So it is an important component that we are investing in and we need to keep an eye on.
Have you made changes in the budget proposal in light of the recent events? Anything where it's a moving around of a reinvestment? We talked a bit about the $50,000 allocation from executive branch and the $300,000 target that the councilman had already identified. But any other changes that are coming or have been made?
I mean, every year is really a focus on the safety of Jacksonville, and that's been 3 years of building blocks from. We've talked about the investments in JSO, now investing to make sure we have rescue units at every fire station. That's new. An upgraded 911 system. All of the pieces matter. And what I don't want to see happen in this debate is people pick a side. You have to have prevention, intervention, and enforcement. You have to have all of it, and you have to be serious about all of it. Because you know what? Where there are bad guys roaming the streets, the people of Jacksonville want to know that Mike's team has the resources and the will, because they have the resources, to get them off the street.
Sheriff, you had mentioned ShotSpotter's technology. There's also Real-Time Crime Center that will be at some point up and going. What's the status of that, and when do you start to look for a payoff to say that was a good return on investment?
So we'll start a pilot program. I believe it's the end of the month is when that cranks up. And again, it's just another tool. There's not one thing in terms of technology that, hey, if Jacksonville had this, it would solve the problems. Again, that's not how that works. But the combination of the right things is what will help us down the road. So, real-time crime is going to add a there'll be a camera element to some of that, analysis of a lot of that data very quickly. Again, time is money for us and resources. And so, when we're looking for, that white van on the interstate in a 12-hour window, this system will allow us to look at that 12 hours of video in about 2 or 3 minutes instead of having a detective watch 12 hours of video. So little things like that. Again, are huge in terms of investigative time spent and cutting time down on investigations and getting us to the suspect quicker, which at the end of the day is what we're looking for. So again, all of these technologies are powerful tools, and we just need to find the right combination of them for us here to work.
That's the technology part. The thing we hear from partnerships through Crime Stoppers, for example, is
Right.
the snitching and the no snitching. How deep and pervasive is that? And that's not a Jacksonville thing. I mean, that's got to be a national crime and criminal element problem. But how critical is it to trying to crack that at least a little bit, to both understand where it comes from? Is it home life, the 8-year-old who's seen someone get shot, or is it gang? Where does that initiate from?
So I'll give you this example. So if we have a Grand Park, for instance, which is historically, although doing a lot better, historically been one of the more violent neighborhoods in the city. If we have an issue in Grand Park, the phones at the Police Memorial Building light up. People in Grand Park call us and tell us what they know and give us information. If we have a shooting inside of a club at 3 in the morning and there's 100 people in there, we are going to get nobody saw anything. So it's that culture of gang, guns, and drugs, and that street culture where we do not get cooperation. It's not pervasive in the entire community. It is a small number of people in this community that drive a significant portion of the issues that we're sitting here talking about today. So you have to work on the prevention end so kids don't get pulled into that culture. But really, that's where the driver is, and that's what has been a big focus of ours for the last couple of years.
Are there, we've seen programs in historical perspective, we've seen gun bounties, for example. I think the gun bounty program was initiated in like 2003, and it kind of flared up, went away. Is that a program that has success? Is that something that you want to invest deeper in? You both looked at each other like, maybe there's something already.
Might be something coming.
Maybe something coming. But yes, I mean that's a very creative program because it's not a gun buyback.
Right. Where is it different than a gun buyback?
So we get this conversation a lot, and I tell people, look, there are 2 things you get from a gun buyback. You get the opportunity, give someone the opportunity in the community who has a gun in their home that doesn't want it. They have a place safely to come give it to us, and we get rid of it. And you keep the conversation going about crime and violence in the community, which is always a good thing. You want that on the front burner. But in terms of crime reduction, it doesn't. There's never been a study that says a gun buyback, reduces crime at all in any community. So you have that element there. The gun bounty is a little different. The gun bounty is a program where we are reaching into that culture, that street culture. We're offering a reward for an anonymous tip that leads to the arrest of a felon or someone carrying a gun illegally, a drug dealer. So we need a body and a gun to get, for the reward to be issued. And again, completely anonymous through Crime Stoppers, the only completely anonymous tip line in the country. So it's a great partnership with Crime Stoppers. It's a great partnership not only for the community who will take advantage of it, but to try to crack that, what we just talked about, that gang, gun, and drug culture a little bit. If you dangle $1,000 in front of a lot of those people, they'll pick up the phone and make a call if they know it's anonymous. And we had success with it before, got away from it a little bit, no reason to do that, and so that's one of the things we're looking at potentially cranking back up again.
Reinvestment in that? Should we look for that news in the coming days or weeks?
That may be something we're engaging the private sector on for an investment.
When you have to get creative with these kinds of ideas and get in front of people maybe in a non-traditional manner, or maybe go back to the well on something that has seen success. To your point earlier, Mayor, you don't necessarily keep trying the same thing over and over and over again unless you saw some success with it and you can revisit it if it worked for you.
That's right. And this is an idea that Mike's brought to me, and we're gonna move on this together. But I think it's something really important that Mike just said. Again, very small community, very small group of people that are committing these crimes, that are wreaking havoc and causing violence. By and large, the people of Jacksonville are law-abiding. They want us to invest in kids. They want police officers in their neighborhoods. So we can't allow the discussion to turn to believing that a small group of bad apples represent an entire neighborhood or entire zip code. They're making all the news for that zip code and neighborhood, but that doesn't represent those people.
Sheriff, you recently were talking about gangs, and it may have come as a result of, or somehow with questions around the arrests that came from the shooting after the Rains High School football game, and you alluded to deeper dive into that, investment of time and resources and energy into that. What should we look for, or are there already steps being taken within JSO or through the city or both that renew focus on gangs, gang activity, gang culture? Is there anything new that's developed?
So most of that comment was really good around the enforcement operations and really cranked up before the Rains High School shooting. We really took a hard look at that after the Heidi Villanueva case. realizing that type of lawless activity, spilling over and touching an innocent child like that is completely unacceptable. And so where can we refocus our efforts? Where do we know we need to be? Are we there enough? And again, being very critical of ourselves and our own operations. And so we actually met this morning and rolled out some different, without going into a whole lot of detail.
It's just us. You can do that.
Yeah,
Go
a different vantage point to the same target, so to speak. So we know that, again, as the mayor said, it is literally a small number of people in this community that drive a significant portion, probably up to 40%, of the violence in this community. And it's not that they're victimizing all of us in this community, but they're victimizing themselves over and over and over again, which drives up rates, drives up numbers, and we see this over and over again. So that's ground zero for us. That's from an enforcement standpoint where the work has to be. Years ago, there was the concept in law enforcement was you geographically throw a blanket, and in that blanket, it's zero tolerance. Well, what you did about 95% of the time is you really touched people that didn't need your attention. You touched the plumber coming home from work, or you touch grandma going to the grocery store, or you touch kids playing basketball on a court. They don't need our time and attention, from an enforcement standpoint. It's that small number of people. And again, you were productive about 5% of the time doing that. So law enforcement in general has moved away from that. The agencies that are using evidence-based practices and using a lot of data, we're very specific about who we target and who gets our time and attention. So what we wanted to do was refocus that and just make sure that we are spending the time and effort where we need to be.
How small of a number is it to create 40%?
So
40%
I'll
of
tell
the
you,
violent crimes, shootings, homicides?
Absolutely. You can take 1,000 people out of Jacksonville and it changes the picture completely. And so to your point, one of the new creative things that we've done, that we've seen done in other cities, Boston in the mid-'90s, is leverage a focused deterrent strategy where, we're in Jacksonville, it's a little different, but we're out knocking on those doors. Either that family member who has someone who's engaged in that culture, or that individual directly, and having a conversation then about what the expectations are from us. You will not be the most violent gang in our city. You will not shoot anybody, or you will get all of our time and attention. And when I say all of I'm talking JSO, ATF, FBI, FDLE. Everybody's at the table with us working on this project. So there's a large portion of the law enforcement community engaged in this activity day in and day out. But it is a struggle. There's no doubt about it. It's not easy. Again, there's not one thing you can do that'll turn it and fix it. But we're cautiously optimistic about some of the numbers that we've seen, in the last 6 to 8 months, where we know we're beginning to have a little bit of impact there.
Mayor, something that surprised me most in our roundtable last week, and really our goal was to look under the hood and try to get a better idea of, what are the conversations, what is the reality of life in some areas where I may not be all the time, if not ever, and I don't understand a lot about the culture and about the community and the engagement within that community. One of the things that stood out was, what about getting back to neighborhood barbecues and more basketball hoops for the kids to rally around so the kids can go out and play basketball? There's only so much that a city can do and fund, but have we spent enough time and money in upgrading these parks in some of these areas that the sheriff, you can use his data to say, we really need to be visible there? Where are there still vulnerabilities that you see? And in some ways, is it a return to older values maybe of just neighbor helping neighbor out to try to find a solution?
Neighbor helping neighbor out is what we can do as government is there, set the tone and encourage them, but hearts and minds are going to have to be changed. But again, as I said, I believe, in fact, I know I've been on these front porches and knocked on these doors, as has the sheriff. You take a zip code where there's high rates of violence, the people in that neighborhood, those individuals, are not representative of those committing these crimes. So where we have parks that we can invest in, and budgets are a statement of priorities. We're investing in those things. They also need to feel safe in those parks. So, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. If someone decided that the solution to violent crime and shootings, let's just keep it at that right now, was to solve all of the factors that go into it, that's overwhelming. We ought to focus on all those factors. But the conversation we're having now is if we want to save lives and drive those numbers down, what are the 2 or 3 or 4 things that are related to, correlate with and get to those young people.
Sheriff, as we wind up the conversation, the word hope keeps coming up. Kids Hope Alliance. You said KHA earlier. You obviously live it. It's part of the culture and the DNA from the leadership. We also heard from the panel last week that despite all of the struggles, despite the violent crime numbers, despite spates of violence that we see, August was a really tough month in Jacksonville. Where do you still have hope? Officers on the front line and in the communities, what still drives them every day to have that hope? Because we heard that from the panel, that these community leaders, the people on the ground, have hope for this future generation.
Yeah, and I do, and I tell you, what gives me hope is that from my perspective, as the leader of the law enforcement organization, the men and women who are out there day in and day out, engaging the community, actively engaging the community. Obviously taking bad guys off the street, and we've been very fortunate in leveraging a lot of things to help us do that in these cases. We're going to continue that. We're going to continue to do that day in and day out. And what bolsters us is the support that we get from the community. We have a tremendous amount of support citywide in this community, and I tell the officers all the time, listen, just recognize that. Recognize that some days may be tough, some months may be tough, but stay focused and keep fighting the fight, and we'll get over it sooner or later. We'll get through it.
Sheriff Mike Williams, Mayor Lenny Curry. Closing thoughts?
We remain committed, and 3 years of investments with a whole lot of work to do. And as long as one of these are happening, we're gonna stick with it and care about every family in every neighborhood.
We appreciate the conversation, and thank you for your willingness to come in and talk about a tough subject. Thank you. Appreciate it, and thank you for tuning in.